to the Mavericast, the Christmas special. I'm your host, Sam, as always, here along with Peter Brath.
Hey.
Arno.
Hi.
And Marlo.
Hi.
So before we start, why don't you introduce yourself, Peter Brath?
Yeah, I'm Peter. I'm a sophomore here at Pitt, political science and economics major, and I probably most align with politically John Kasich.
Boo. And
he would have saved so many more babies than Trump.
And you, Marlo? Why don't you introduce yourself, Grandmaster?
Okay, well, I'm Grandmaster Marlo Safi. I am a junior at Pitt, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Pitt Maverick, as well as, I guess politically, I best align with, I would like to think Ted Cruz, but I do vary from his views, so I consider myself a traditional conservative.
And this is actually not Marlo's first time on the podcast, but the other two times, one time we just lost the podcast, and then the other time we may or may not have had to re-record the podcast. Yorgi, we'll call out. So today, it's the Christmas special. This is pre-recorded, so we're not going to really be talking about any news, even though stuff's going on today. We'd love to, but by the time this comes out, it'll be old and everyone will be bored of it already, since that's the way the world works now. But today we're going to talk about something a little different. So we're going to talk about kind of the influence of religion, specifically Judeo-Christian values, on U.S. culture, society, and politics. And really we want to talk about the founding and the founding documents. And the Enlightenment as well, and some of the thinkers that came out of that movement.
How does Christmas come into that?
Because Christmas is a Christian holiday, so I was like, hey, let's make a podcast about this.
Oh,
Don't criticize me, Arno. Every single time we get criticized on the show. It's like we're 2 minutes in and the shots are being fired already. Oh, man. So I guess I'll start with this. I want to start with the probably the most famous part of the Declaration of Independence that everybody knows, since nobody really reads past this part. So it's the quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, just to go off of that, I think this quote kind of, people don't really realize what this means, and if anybody much wanted to join in with me on this, the idea that rights come from God and not coming from government or other people, and obviously that's the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Arno, thanks a lot. So I think that's something, I know, I don't know if anybody else was taught this, but like when we learn about the American Revolution in US 1, in my AP history class, we were never taught the difference between the two revolutions. We're just taught like this happened and this happened. I don't know, like how were you guys taught about like the difference between the intellectual outcomes of these movements originally? Because I was never taught that. I kind of had to just learn that on my own.
Yeah, I don't really remember ever getting more than a superficial kind of, education about what happened in the two revolutions. The theory and the philosophy behind the outcomes kind of came with reading, outside of being taught that. I don't really, being educated about like Thomas Paine, John Locke especially, those things were, things that you pick up on your own. I don't think you can necessarily learn those in the classroom, but, they did have very, I think they should be taught because they obviously were very influential in terms of the, theories and the people that the two revolutions bred.
Mm-hmm. In my middle school history class, we were lucky to have a teacher who did talk a little bit about the intellectual foundations, but again, it was a middle school class, so you could only say so much. But he definitely did paint the revolution in a positive light, the American one, and obviously you don't talk about the French one until you take AP World History or whatever the equivalent is. We didn't spend too much time with the French Revolution, so I don't really have too much of a benchmark. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I really just kind of got a pretty superficial education on that too. That's not really something I've looked into very much.
Not all of us went to elite magnet school, Sam.
Yeah.
I didn't go to a magnet school.
I went to
I went to
public
I went to an IB school.
Oh,
And it was a public school. Sir.
Public, quote unquote.
It was public.
Mine was pure public.
I mean, wow. Everybody's just firing shots at me. It's the Christmas podcast. Let's be nice to each other.
Elitist scum.
Well, I do remember actually in US 1, because we did cover some of the Enlightenment philosophers, but it wasn't really like a lecture or a PowerPoint thing. It was actually a project. So my person was John Locke. So we kind of memed the heck out of the project because we were sophomores in high school and we didn't really care. But yeah, I was always really great at making presentations with zooming in and out on pictures and putting up stupid stuff on the slides because that's the type of person I am.
Somehow I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Would you be surprised to hear that in US 2 I got kicked out for imitating Richard Nixon?
Wow.
Which, yeah, I was Richard Nixon. Like I was really great in high school.
Well done, sir.
I was really great in high school.
And then they're going to attack. No, but
what quote is that?
I don't know. It's just the first thing that came out of my brain. I was thinking of the Call of Duty thing where Richard Nixon is and JFK and them.
Oh.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The Nazi zombies thing.
Yeah.
Back to American political theory.
And on the Christmas special.
Yeah. But like we did projects on them, but I feel like you don't really gain a lot from student presentations on this type of thing. I think a lot of this is maybe a bit too much for a high school student, at least someone who's never really been introduced to it by a teacher to kind of understand what it really means. I mean, it was only until after I read Barry Goldwater's Conscience of a Conservative that I went back to that stuff and I was like, oh, like that's what it means. Like kind of using that framing that Goldwater gives and then reading other conservative writers on my own, just kind of being like, so this is what all that means. Like this is what it means when they say are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Like that's the concept behind it. And but like without that philosophical background or just going out and reading about natural law and things like that, you really never, I mean, if you don't know any of that, I mean, what's the difference between someone saying the government's going to give you a right to health care and someone saying there's the right to freedom of speech? Like nobody really understands the difference, and I think that it's maybe a big problem with
yeah, because whenever you blend those two things, you're able to say that the government can essentially create these rights if they already endow them to you. So obviously, if they're God-given, then they're there. You can't just pull them out. You can't just pull the right to health care out of the sky. Whenever you say that the government creates these rights and they endow them to the people, there's no limit on what rights they can create, and you come up with silly things like the right to travel. Right. Or just kind of, this election has brought out a lot of bizarre, obviously, like some of these are rights people should have, but, a lot of them are just things that people think that the government is within their capacity to create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you put the burden on the government to create rights, you also then give them the power to restrict rights and decide what rights you don't have. And so, that's why I think like with kind of the move away from our like kind of Christian culture in America, we tend to see people being much more willing, especially along like the secular left, to get rid of some of their rights, like to free speech and things like that. I
think you even see with the death of Castro, and even I see it in the classroom when we're talking about like when we're talking about the Brazilian dictatorship and all this stuff. This material, it's almost like the Marxist materialist concept that, like, people care, that, like, some people just seem to not care about the right that you can go out in the street and say, like, screw you, like, I don't like what you're doing, because they're going to have, free healthcare, quote-unquote. I do want to read two quotes from actually what's my favorite book. So it's from the book Starship Troopers. So I don't know if you guys have seen the movie, but the movie's a parody of the book. So the book is pretty much like 1984. Just it's more science fiction-y because there's aliens and all that nonsense. But also, it's instead of like communist, it's like it's fascist. And so there's a lot of elements of the book that are really weird. I recommend some people read it because I think it's an underrated political fiction book. It poses maybe the greatest counter argument to the natural rights, and I think Heinlein kind of misses some parts of the idea of the natural rights. But I think I'm going to read these two, and then I want to hear your reactions to it. This is a quote from the teacher in the book. There's a flashback scene, and what people think about these parts of the book is this is Heinlein himself speaking through a character. So there's every now and then you'll get these parts, and I quoted them because I think they're so important to just the political idea behind the book. So this is the first one. Ah, yes, the inalienable rights. Each year someone quotes that magnificent poetry. Life. What right to life has a man who is drowning in the Pacific? The ocean will not hearken his cries. What right to life has a man who must die if he is to save his children? If he chooses to save his own life, does he do so as a matter of right? If two men are starving and cannibalism is the only alternative to death, which man's right is inalienable? And is it right? As to liberty, the heroes who signed that great document pledged themselves to buy liberty with their lives. Liberty is never inalienable. It must be redeemed regularly with the blood of patriots, or it always vanishes. And of all the so-called natural human rights that have ever been invented, liberty is the least likely to be cheap and is never free of cost. Any reactions to that type of counter argument?
There's a lot there.
I know, there's a lot. Do you want to just kind of break this down in terms of, I guess, life, the right to life? I think the most interesting thing he brings up, I think it's obviously an extenuating circumstance, but whose right to life is unalienable if it's two men starving and cannibalism is the only option. I think this is a really interesting, maybe philosophical argument.
This is very Christmassy, Sam.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I know cannibalism on Christmas, right? I think this is just a really interesting argument to be made. Before I read this, I never really thought about that type of idea where, like, I mean, obviously we talk about it sometimes where, like, when people's rights come into conflict with each other. And it's even interesting when he brings up, like, the ocean example, where he goes, like, will the ocean not take away this person's right to life? Like, what is, you know, like if, I guess, what I interpret it as, if you really believe in God, why is God gonna let that happen to you? Like, drown in the ocean. I don't know if anybody wants to tackle. I know it's really maybe a big subject, but anybody wants to tackle that.
Well, I could speak to the cannibalism part.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, so this is something where, like, if you don't look at it in, like, a religious sense, where there's, like, concrete, like, laws and things that you should abide by, then yeah, like, who's, like, if you're just, like, you know, a sack of meat, whose right to life matters more in that situation? But if you look at it in a Christian sense, I mean, like, you should respect, both of you should respect each other's right to life, in that, like, you don't kill it. You know, neither of you commits the act. Where, like,
I think what you're saying is that the right to life is universal,
right? Yeah, it's universal. Everybody has it, and so, you know, like, with the whole, like, turn the other cheek and love thy neighbor as you love yourself, it's kind of like, you know, you just kind of bite the bullet and you die.
What was the second question? Why doesn't God save you when you're drowning?
Yeah, that was I added that to, like I guess my extension of this question is what right. So this is what he says: what right to life has a man who is drowning in the Pacific? The ocean will not hearken his cries. And then I said, if you're a religious person, you believe that, I guess, in this whole, you know, Christian concept of how life is, if God is really doing all these things around you that he can't understand, why is this going to happen to you as a religious person who believes that God has entitled you with these rights?
I mean, that's essentially impossible to answer, but I mean, what what you can say is that death is inevitable for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Death is unchanging, and death will always occur. It will happen, and you go when God chooses for you to go. And if that's how He chooses for you to go, then that's it, and it's not really as complicated as people make it out to be, I don't think.
And I think that's part of what he misses here. He misses that religious aspect of it. Not really the religion behind the ideology, but like what you just said, like God chooses when you go. I think he kind of misses that whole other side of it, like the actual pure religious side, like when you spoke about the 2 men starving. I think he only thinks of it in terms of like straight up political principle, not in terms of, I guess, religious principle or like a concept of
respect for other people's rights.
Right.
Things like that.
I do want to read the second quote too, which talks about the pursuit of happiness. Same instance in the book. It's that same character that Heinlein's speaking through. The third right, the pursuit of happiness. It is indeed unalienable, but it is not right. It is simply a universal condition which tyrants cannot take away nor patriots restore. Cast me a dungeon, burn me at the stake, crown me a king of kings. I can pursue happiness as long as my brain lives. But neither gods nor saints, wise men nor subtle drugs can ensure that I will catch it. I think, again, this is him in terms of...
I mean, he's not wrong. I mean, the founders sought to guarantee the pursuit of happiness, not the achievement of happiness.
Right. And I think he misses that. Mm-hmm. Then I think he focuses solely on, will you get that happiness, not in terms of being able to go after it.
But, I mean, you define happiness, no one else does. So, I mean, what can give you happiness besides yourself? Because if you're the one who defines it.
Mm-hmm. I will say, I've spoken to my friends who are more on the left or very far left, and they've said they've used this to defend socialized healthcare, which sounds really weird, but they say, we have a right to pursue happiness. If being healthy makes me happy, are you denying me of my right to pursue happiness?
Well, no, if you're going to make that argument, then you should say, if I have a right to life, shouldn't I have health care? That's
also another argument
to say happy. Yeah. I mean, I think, it's the question of we have these inalienable rights given to us by God, and men aren't angels. We can't expect our fellow man to treat us as we wish. I mean, there is murder. We can't deny that. There is, hostility toward our fellow man, but it's the government's duty to ensure that, that they're regulating that behavior in terms of law and order, making sure that, if our rights that are given to us by God are infringed upon, that they are served the punishment that they deserve. When anything beyond that, when they start, creating rights out of a vacuum that they establish themselves, that's kind of crossing the boundaries of liberty, and it starts to dilute the Judeo-Christian principles that these, rights were established upon, in the Constitution. We can't forget that, especially we are largely becoming secular. The statistic is astounding for how many people are, go to church. I think it's less than ever. A lot of people are identifying more as, my parents were Christian, but I don't really observe. I don't observe any religion. Or, I'm Jewish, but I celebrate Hanukkah, but that's it. So I think it's important to realize that, whenever people argue that, religiosity or whatever has no place in our country, that we wouldn't be able to have the judicial system we have that ensures that every single person is able to mind their own business and have that undergo that pursuit of happiness. It doesn't exist in a society that is entirely secularized to that degree that it's incompatible with our governance.
We're getting pretty far here. I mean, on the discussion of rights, I think it's important to show prudence. I mean, there is a case to be made for right to health care, right to education, and indeed we do have a right to both in the U.S. If you go into a hospital, you will receive care, regardless of whether or not you can afford it. That's the law. Whether it's a public or private hospital, you have a right as a child to receive public education. That's the law. I don't think as conservative that any of us would want to see that go away. So I think it's important that we be careful how we discuss these things and really stress the concept of prudence. That it is important in countries such as ours that we provide a certain level of safety for those at the bottom, for those, especially those who do work because of various disadvantages. They can't achieve what they would like to, what they work to achieve.
And I do want to go back to something that Marlo said about religion in the United States today, and in terms of its impact on the culture. You say, like, you said, people will be like, oh, like, my mom and dad were Christian, but, like, I don't really believe in that. I grew up in a household where my dad was raised Jewish, and he had a bar mitzvah, and then my mom was raised Greek Orthodox, and she went to Sunday school. She learned Greek there. She learned all about religion, and then obviously I guess you could say it's a mixed religion marriage. Growing up, I was baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church. We would go like twice a year, but then we would also do like some of the Jewish holidays. Do you think that this is something that's common now in America, where people are marrying across religious lines, and if you can't find an agreement where someone's going to convert or they can't convert due to whatever religious rules or whatnot, that's part of the reason why maybe people are becoming more secular? No, not at all.
No, I think I don't think it's a serious problem. I think the problem with marriage is almost entirely cultural. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a household with parents of two religions. Me and my mom chose, so I grew up Catholic. My dad was Presbyterian, and eventually he converted. I know that's not the case for everyone, but I mean, the main thing is having both parents involved in the faith, or having similar spiritual beliefs, both showing an interest in that child's spiritual upbringing. If that's not happening, it becomes a problem. You can have a father or a mother who thinks differently than you are raised, but if they're encouraging you to seek a spiritual life, then your chances of success are very good. I think the chances of your success are worst is in a single-parent home, and that is higher than ever. The rate of single-parent, mostly single motherhood, of course, rates of single fathers are unfortunately really like pitifully low. It's like 3%. So I think that's the main problem with single-parent families when you're talking about the success for a child's spiritual upbringing and general upbringing. I think the two correlate.
I mean, I know, like, personally, I have a lot of friends that are Jewish that, were raised in households where their mother was Catholic, or their mother was Christian, and their dad was Jewish, or vice versa. And they're, productive citizens of society and some of the most intelligent people I've ever met. But they grew up with a very a secular upbringing, a very progressive upbringing. I remember telling my dad actually once, he thought I was dating a Jewish boy, and he told me, my dad's Syrian, we're a Syrian Christian. He told me that, I can't marry this person because that's where he draws the line. My parents consider themselves pretty progressive, but it's just for the sake of, I do want children, and he said, that's where you draw the line here. You want your kids to grow up in a spiritual household, and my parents raised me in one that was decently spiritual. And if you want to instill your children with faith, which I think is extremely pertinent, right, especially right now in our political climate, or any climate, but especially now, it's definitely something that I think you don't even have to be necessarily religious to consider. Now, like Arno said, it's definitely a cultural thing. But I think now more than ever, people are willing to cross boundaries to marry because, religion has become kind of a, it's maybe the third or fourth thing on people's considerations whenever they're considering a significant other.
Exactly. When neither parent particularly cares, then it doesn't matter anyway. And I think you have these situations emerging where you have like significant differences, where one parent's an atheist and one parent's a Christian or whatever. that in those cases the Christian person is not likely to be very active in the faith, and doesn't have much interest in, like you were saying, doesn't have much interest in raising a Christian child. Generally, I mean, I'm sure it does happen, but again, I think it's far from the biggest problem.
I'd agree with that.
So on the topic of culture, you guys mentioned, I guess how culture is very secular now. Do you see, I guess, a way to kind of bring not even just Christianity, but in terms of, I guess, making religion more acceptable in popular culture? I mean, I think now if people find out that someone's religious, I think it's almost like a bad, like people see it as a bad thing. Like if you find out that, I know like there will be football players at the end of a game, and they'll be like, oh, like thank God and Jesus, blah 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 blah, and then people will be what, like, why is he doing that? Like that's so, like, people don't understand this concept. Like, I think there are some parts of culture and some certain figures that do actually talk about religion and actually kind of sneak it into the things they do, which I'll talk about in a bit. But do you think there's a way for maybe Christianity or Judaism, whatever religion, to kind of come back and be, I guess, more socially acceptable? Because I feel like it's almost not in very popular culture in terms of like the age of celebrity we live in now.
I think you have to look at what's underlied America's cultural decline, especially over the past 50, 60 years now, going back to the early 60s, late 50s. You can look at the growth of things like the welfare state. So then you can look at poor communities, poor families. They don't exist anymore in terms of structure. It's all single mothers. It's all broken communities. And that's largely a consequence of the welfare state. And as time goes on and more people, funnel through the system, then the cultural problem gets worse and worse. So I think there are policy roots in the cultural problems we have, and that's important to address. Whether you can get those traditions back, and that would be very, very tough. I can't really think of incidents in history where a culture has been recaptured after it disappeared. I mean, sometimes people do rekindle traditions, but when you talk about Christmas, you're talking about a whole host of traditions, and it's very deep. It's not just some one-dimensional little, here's a tree, let's put some lemons on it. There's real stuff to it. If in 40, 50 years Christmas is just about some fat red guy going down your chimney leaving Christmas presents and no one remembers why that's happening, which is a legitimate risk going down the years, and that is a problem. And I think that's where it starts, is keeping Christ in Christmas, accepting the secular aspects. We're not all Christian, that's okay. Let's embrace the positive, charitable aspects and family aspects of Christmas, okay? But let's make sure that we, in our personal lives within our families, are retaining Christ as the center of the holiday.
No, Peter.
Yeah. Well, I think actually a big thing with this is that starting probably about in the 60s, I would say, along with the whole hippie movement and things, I think that churches started following cultural trends instead of creating them. And that was a big thing, was that up until just recently, the church was the center of the community, and it led, most of the charitable works came from the church and everything. And now more than ever, people are donating more money to charities than ever, but they're not going through church charities. They're going through secular charities and things like that. And what we need is for the church to kind of toughen up and lead the culture and not care about maybe backlash from the community, because Christians we're not supposed to be afraid to fight the good fight. You don't want to take this lightly. It's very important.
Yeah, we shouldn't bend our principles to fit the cultural kind of mold that That's a great point, though. Like, I think a lot of churches, or a lot of Christians even, Arno calls them cafeteria. Is it cafeteria Catholics? Or yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, people tend to pick and choose, what aspects of, if they do choose to even call themselves Christians, they pick and choose what they like of the religion, and that's become very much so acceptable. Mm-hmm. Not to say that it shouldn't be, but I think, if you, like Peter said, I think, the churches do need to toughen up in a sense. And, this is our creed and this is our dogma. And if you don't like aspects of it, we can't change it. This is what was written out for us.
I think for a lot of people, faith or just the name Christian is becoming an accessory. Mm-hmm. You see people, this was big when I was going to school, people walk around wearing rosaries. Well, number one, you're not really supposed to wear rosaries, so obviously you don't understand what's going on there. But it's an accessory. It's just something people use when they're customizing their personality. People choose their personality. They choose who they are, what they believe in the morning, like they choose an outfit more and more. So you're losing those cultural roots, those bases of belief. Nothing's concrete anymore. I think that's why where the churches come in, like you guys have been saying, so that last rock against rapidly changing cultural tides. So I think you're right. It's very important that they change as little as possible.
Now you mentioned just to relate this back to popular culture. Going out, not being afraid of, not bending your principle to, I guess, appease or something like that. I feel like there actually are some people and bands in popular culture that actually are religious, and people don't even realize that they're listening or to something religious or watching something conservative or Christian or something like that. My favorite example to use is actually the band 21 Pilots. I know that their singer is extremely religious himself. I'm not too familiar with the specifics, but I believe he had a spiritual awakening at some point in his early adulthood. It was something like that. I know he had a near-death experience, and then he kind of became very religious. A lot of their music is actually very religious if you look at it, and it's very interesting to see how the lyrics of that music put to like a pop culture type beat. People don't even seem to realize what's being sung to them. The best example of this is in their song Car Radio, which is literally, the way I've interpreted it is about, like, so pretty much he talks about, like, the car radio is no longer on, and it's kind of like there's no reason, like, he sees, like, no reason to keep going or something like that. And then at one point he goes, there's faith and there's sleep, we need to pick one, please. And then he talks about pretty much how I think a quote is, faith is to be awake. And someone would totally miss that because it's just he's rapping. It's almost like a poetry slam, a rap type song, and like people don't even realize that they're listening to that. I think there's a lot of examples of that in other bands and in movies and stuff like that. I think a way to maybe rekindle this culture or this feel, at least for people to maybe at least understand more about this, whether or not they believe it's their own choice, to just maybe to have a new understanding, is for people like that to not be afraid to go out and kind of, you share their values in a unique way. Because I definitely think, like, I know if I probably went up to someone who says they're a 21 Pilots fan and asked them to explain that to me, they would be like, oh yeah, you're just talking about car radio, like a literal car radio. It's like, oh man, like your high school English teacher obviously didn't teach you how to read poetry, because I was told when the drapes are blue, it represents something in the author's life. Like, I don't know if do you guys have any is there any work in pop culture or something like that that really stands out to you as a conservative or Christian or religious type influencer that kind of is very out and about it? I can think of a few, but
if you gave me like an hour, I'm afraid I'm a little too culturally out of touch to really come up with anything.
Honestly,
at the minute.
I can speak to this a little bit.
Like,
Okay.
I think something that's comforting. Now, I shop a lot, and
I feel that, Marlo.
Yeah, I shop a lot, and every time I go to Forever 21, I always make sure to check the bottom of the bag because it always says John 3:16, and it's almost like subconscious. I'm always expecting it to be gone, because our society has become so kind of we want to almost eradicate religion, especially Christianity, from popular culture, because it's we're in search of equality more than we are of liberty. And that's a very frightening prospect, especially if you have any insight into Marxism. And I know that's kind of far-fetched, but when you think about it, and I know I'm going off kind of on a tangent here, is the two are antithetical. Religion and Marxism are antithetical. And with that knowledge, I go in shopping and I look at the bottom of the bag every time, expecting it to be gone, because there was some regulation imposed that said you can't put that on your, and even at a private institution, you cannot put that on your bag, or the company got backlash for it. And it's a soft censorship. And it's really interesting because everywhere there was the 10 Commandments being taken off of property, and just things like that. It is slightly frightening. And
in Allegheny County, like 2 years ago.
Yeah, there was a Supreme Court case as well. I think it was Allegheny County versus I forget who it was against, but just everything is, you expect to see kind of, especially during Christmas time, seeing, whenever we drive in Oakland, we have by UPMC the secular like Christmas nativity, which is like, what was it, a menorah and Santa Claus. And the season exists, like Garna said, keep Christ in Christmas, but pop culture is largely saying, no, let's turn it into this consumerist, crazed, season that we've kind of crafted it as being. And capitalism's great, but I think definitely, trying to keep Christ in Christmas is something we should continue doing, or at least as a Christian, you should do.
Peter, did you have something?
Well, kind of off of what Marlo said, I remember I was talking to a few of my friends last year about kind of like religion in public schools around the Philadelphia area, and their teachers aren't allowed to wear necklaces with crosses on them, because apparently that's against the separation of church and state, and there's some schools where they're not allowed to wear a big thing at my school was the Pick Jesus shirt with the it was like a guitar pick and it said Pick Jesus. They're not even allowed to wear those in school. They're not, the kids are, which I think is ridiculous.
And you mentioned separation of church and state. As far as I'm knowledgeable about, there's nothing in our Constitution saying separation of church and state.
Not specifically.
However, it is specifically worded. It was specifically worded for the Soviet Union that there is a separation of church and state. I think people tend to. I think that I did not know that it's not a specific wording in our own Constitution until probably after high school, because you're always taught separation of church and state, separation of church and state. I was taught that when I was growing up, even by my parents. Yes, there's a separation of church and state.
It is taken as a given, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think people don't even know that, and that going back to just the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, people don't even realize that, if you say separation of church and state, then there's no way to legitimize the founding documents, because I feel like they're so ingrained in a religious principle. And I do want to kind of go over to another topic. Now, obviously, I think we can all agree that, and I think it's pretty obvious, that there is a very heavy religious influence in the founding documents and the philosophers behind the founders. Now, do you think there's a way, and if so, what is the way to effectively share these values with someone who considers themselves an atheist or believes, religion is just a bunch of, people doing, whatever they might think about it, to share it, these values, while still maintaining that principle of rights coming from God?
So I think what's important for us to talk about as conservatives isn't so much what we believe in this context, but why we believe it. I think we often lose sight of that. And I was talking to a good friend of mine yesterday. Who was saying, I would be a conservative, essentially, but they're always talking about God. They hear people like Rick Santorum or Mike Huckabee or people, and they go out and talk about God, and they get upset with that. They don't feel welcomed, or they just get irritated by it. Whatever. I said, I am conservative on most social issues, but it's not because I'm some religious zealot. Yes, my Christian faith underlies many of my beliefs, but I never use it as an argument. I feel, the second I use because I'm a Christian as an argument, I know I've lost the argument, because that's not how you can do these things. It has to be grounded in reason and logic. But I told him, the greatest single predictor of a child's success in life is whether or not they grow up in a safe and stable home. If they don't, then their chances of growing up to be poor and undereducated are several times higher than they would in a two-parent home, especially one that's safe and secure. So there are real, significant, and extremely important reasons why tradition and faith and these things are important, because they are key deciders in the health of a culture, an economy, and a country, all of these things. And I think it's important that we actually talk about that, because I feel like as conservatives we lose sight of why these are actually important.
Now you've mentioned a lot about economics and how economics impact the culture and impact the individual in terms of growing up in a single parent household, the economic impacts of that. Now, last night when I finished my paper at 6:30 in the morning, which is
this morning.
This morning.
So today.
Pretty much. So I'm writing a paper, or wrote a paper about essentially Maoism versus Marxism, and comparing the two ideologies. Obviously, both are left wing. If anybody said otherwise, I want to know what they're on. Now there's the part I want to focus on in terms of that I've been reading about is, so Marx focuses on how economics is the key thing in society, and that pretty much all of society revolves around economics. Now Mao actually takes this another way, which I found surprising when I was reading about it, and he kind of talks about ideological superstructure. That was the quote. Now, not necessarily using that same wording as ideological superstructure, because I wouldn't really refer to Christianity as such. But do you think, in terms of maybe now, for America in this moment in time, is it necessarily the ideology surrounding people and the culture? Like, I'm going to read ideology and culture, because there's a definite ideology, I believe, behind the culture. Or do you think it's economics that really form everything?
Well,
like in terms of forming the opinion.
I think the great irony is that, in a big way, Marx was kind of right.
Mm-hmm.
Don't underestimate the influence of economics on a litany of other factors. It's extremely important. Certainly not the sole factor, but extremely important. And when I talk about economics, it's not just economics, but economic policy,
right.
Fiscal policy, what you're using government resources on. So it's not just economics, but the reason I say it's ironic is look at the cultural health of any communist country, especially before the collapse. There was a complete absence of culture. Everyone was miserable. Everyone was depressed. There was no progress. There really was no culture. Nothing new was being created. It was essentially a shorter Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, the discussion, but in Eastern Europe, where really nothing of cultural value was created, or that was created publicly. Mm-hmm. Certainly there were underground artists and things like that, but the system they created was so dehumanizing that it really left no room for cultural growth. Mm-hmm. I think the freer people are, the better off the culture. I think history shows that. And that's why I say it's ironic. And again, in a way, I think Marx had a point. he was wrong about all the applications, but he was right about the importance of economics.
Mm-hmm. Because this is for me kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg type deal, where I think it honestly, in my opinion, I think it kind of depends on the individual situation you look at, because I think all areas are different. Like you mentioned Eastern Europe, that's like one case where I think absolutely Marx is right. I think you look at some other parts of the world, and I think, I mean, again, like with China, where Mao figures out that Marx is wrong in terms of the case of China, where it was mostly culture that was big, not economics. And just in terms of that individual case, just to briefly say, there are people living in poverty because they were just rural peasants on the farms for literally hundreds of years, and they never did anything about it. There's no revolution, even though Marx said there'd be a revolution with the working class or the lower class, but that obviously wasn't it. But then Mao brings along this ideological superstructure, and that's what brings it along. For me on this, it's just to relate this kind of back to like the U.S. I don't know necessarily what comes first. For our own situation, I kind of relate it back to economics as moving the culture. I think definitely with the Bernie Sanders campaign, you mentioned this almost gloomy type scene in Eastern Europe. I mean, I think in terms of the way campaigns were run, that's the Democratic Socialist campaign of Bernie Sanders.
Well, they see the worst in the country.
Right. I mean, it's almost that critical Marxist idea, and I think if you're so critical that you can't find any joy in this country or in the founding documents, like how I said earlier, like you don't even have an appreciation for the rights that are protected by the government, that people don't even enjoy in some other parts of the world that we consider allies.
Imagine a culture run by social justice warriors.
Oh gosh.
Good boy.
Oh my gosh.
And if you just look at their economic policies, and you say a $15 minimum wage, where you have an artificial, essentially trust for the cost of labor, where everyone's going to suddenly be charging $15 an hour because that's a very high wage and no one wants to pay more than that. So then you suddenly have a huge disincentive to actually improve yourself and work harder. I saw in the Philadelphia Inquirer today they published something from it was like a mid-level manager at PennDOT working for the Turnpike, and he resigned.
Ooh, bro.
Well, and what he did is he sent out a mass email to 2,000 employees at the Turnpike, basically blasting the organization. He said it was full of cronyism. They're hiring all these idiots just because they have political connections. Nothing's getting done, and the morale is terrible. Well, imagine that on a macro scale, and you basically have, and he's right, of course, and you have a socialist economy. You have an economy with extensive government controls. And, that's what we're concerned about. Because, of course, it's a terrible environment. It's a terrible way to live. And that's a terrible way to work. You're not creating anything. You're just managing the decline. It goes back and forth. I don't want to dismiss the importance of culture, because it is. But culture often grows out of economics and vice versa. I think people understand the latter, that economics can grow out of culture. You frequently hear politicians making the case, cultural cases for government or economic policy. You rarely hear the other way around, that we need to make this policy to improve the culture. I think that's something we're lacking.
Mm-hmm. Do you have
No, I'm good.
I do want to talk about maybe the Bernie Sanders idea, because we're on a very liberal college campus. We are on a college campus where if you put a Trump table out, people will feel a need to yell at you for having an opinion. Like it's like a thought crime here, even in the classroom sometimes. Now, when talking about conservatism on the college campus, and this is actually kind of why I wanted to do an episode like this, because I feel like this is kind of like conservatism 101, almost, kind of like the foundations of kind of what conservatism believe in some ways. What's the effective way to talk to someone who literally thinks that we're the worst people on earth, who's probably never met someone who think like us, to explain what we believe to them? Because I think so much of what people think, I mean, like, you go out there with the Trump table and you get yelled at, even though you might be, like, I was wearing a Rand Paul shirt, and, like, you know, you get, like Rand Paul's, like, you know, he has terrible foreign policy, but the guy loves the Constitution. Like, how do you share these conservative values with these people that just can't seem to comprehend what we're talking about?
Well, so these people, like, the crazy ones that, you know, that, like, attack us and, you know, like,
threaten our lives,
things like that. They're so ingrained in their beliefs. You're not gonna have like 1 or 2 or 3 conversations with them and then like suddenly convince them to be like a conservative.
And you might not even
Christian.
get one conversation with them.
You might not even get a conversation with them. One of the big things is, and Ben Shapiro talked about this a lot, is that with a lot of these leftist people, it's not really worth talking to them one-on-one. You have to talk to them in front of a group of people and kind of embarrass them through like the idiocy really of their beliefs, and through that you'll convince people who are more easy to like sway to like kind of be like, oh, this person has a point, maybe I've been thinking, you know, wrong, rather than coming at an individual personally and saying like what you believe is wrong and we believe is right, because that can a lot of times kind of cause a backfire and they'll dig deeper into their own beliefs.
I think it's also important to understand that sometimes you're going to have to agree to disagree. And that's largely what's going to happen. A lot of people are very steadfast in their beliefs, just as we are in ours. But I had a great conversation with the editor-in-chief of the Fourth Wave, the feminist publication on Pitt's campus, and I agreed to disagree with her. You know, I might agree with her on some tenets of feminism, but beyond that, you know, I can't say I would fall under any of her other beliefs. But it's a mutual respect. We respect each other as human beings, and that's important for not only civility, but for, you know, people want to call our universities a marketplace of ideas. You can't do that unless, you know, you're able to, you know, engage in this discourse, and understand many people will not give you even a first chance to explain yourself, but those who do, I think conservatives have a duty to, you know, not preach to them. We're not missionaries, but at least tell them our intellectual foundings. They want to hear, you know, that we aren't the party of, for example, you know, like Mike Huckabee or Sarah Palin. I mean, not to knock on both of them, but that's kind of, they perceive them as being these, you know, like idiots. We want to, you know, show them that we are based off of these scholars, these intellectuals. It's a very profound ideology. This is why we believe in it, and I think communicating it by that means is extremely important and effective.
I do want to go off your point of saying like respect the common humanity. I think oftentimes I feel like just in the political culture we're in, we're so eager to jump down someone's throat when they disagree with them. You know, as soon as, and I feel like it could be on both sides too. I mean, definitely everyone's guilty of it. It's not like you're going to point to the left and say, look at them, because there's obviously people on the right that do that too. You'd just be a hypocrite if you don't admit that. But I mean, I always think about it as like, just like have compassion for them, like listen to them. Like, I mean, Paul Ryan says you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionally. Like, listen to what they have to say and don't just reject it immediately. Like, think about it. You don't have to agree about it, but just like think about it, think about their experience and stuff like that. And I do want to mention something. I know at the Trump table you were talking to people who were kind of like the hecklers, and I think as soon as you mentioned that you were a Syrian person, you instantly got like you were legitimized. Your opinion was legitimized. It's really
unfortunate. I actually wrote a column for a feminist publication about how, you know, as I've been called a traitor, I've been called an Uncle Tom, I've been called every name in the book, as far as, you know, actually I was called a disgrace to my people in front of the Pitt News opinions board. Yeah, so, you know, people are willing to listen to me as a Arab woman, but they aren't willing to listen to me as a conservative. sometimes people will listen to me as both. Like Sam said, once I mention, I'm like, yeah, just, listen to me, here's my views on immigration. They're like, wow, that's really, like, bigoted. And I'll be like, but I'm Arab. They'll be like, wow, tell me more. Like, let me hear what else.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, how is your family? And they'll be so compassionate. And, like, I hate playing that card. I hate playing identity politics. But unfortunately, I have to play that game. If I want to make any, impact on some of these people and genuinely teach them that my white friends should, their beliefs should be just as legitimate as mine are, just listen to me and, what I have to preach to you about my beliefs and, why you shouldn't physically attack my friends because they're not people of color like I am.
Right. I mean, there's a funny thing I know. Isn't like the second season of Modern Family where they're trying to get the girl into the to like this preschool and it's this thing where they're like trying to be the most diverse couple,
like Native American, handicapped,
right. It's just it's like so they go in, they're the two gay white guys with the Asian daughter, but then it's the lesbian couple where the one woman's white and then it's the handicapped woman in the wheelchair and then they have, was it like a black child or something?
I don't remember.
It's just like,
I remember
it's like how diverse can you get? Like and it's a shame that that's what it's come to. That it's like, and that's so true. I don't even know if they meant to do that necessarily.
They absolutely did, and it's become it's become very laughable because people, I have to mention to people that I'm Arab before anything comes out of my mouth, or they'll probably call me like this privileged white girl. I'm sure a lot of my friends have to do that actually. My Arab friends, especially my Arab friends who are Trump voters, that's the first thing they're like. Someone will be like, oh, like, what do you do? You're a white guy. They'll be like, no, I'm Arab. They'll be like, let me hear your policies on immigration, Like,
well, I'm glad that works for you. Some of us can't do that.
Yeah, I know. It's unfortunate.
Nice blonde hair, blue eyes.
Experience generally dictates belief. In the absence of experience, we use emotion. And we see that with these people. They're using almost entirely emotional arguments. And that's why you hear the cries of bigotry, etc., before we even say anything. Because in the absence of experience, they fall back in emotion, but they also aren't really interested in experience. So what conservatives have to start doing is what the left has done well for so long, which is using personal politics. Talking about our own personal experience and that of others. Use anecdotes. Talk about profound life experience. And talk about how their policies or the policies they're proposing actually impact the lives of other people. We never do that, but we can be very effective at it. The legacy of the left's policies are really abysmal in almost any respect. They almost always fail, and that's why we're conservatives. We have to communicate that to them, that we're not just, people who insist on saying no, but that we have legitimate reasons for opposing these policies. It's not greed, it's not bigotry, it's motivated out of a sense of realistic altruism, essentially, and I think that's something we have to start pushing. I don't know that we do that enough right now.
I also think a lot of it's driven just by morality, and I mean definitely.
You can't use that word with them.
Right. Well, and I think what people don't understand about morality, if you're conservative and especially Christian, is that it's morality not based on like what you think, but I guess if I'm saying this wrong, please correct me. But it's morality based on like what the word of God, and it's that religious concept that really then comes into the whole thing. I think one of the biggest things, just due to personal experiences, that attracted me to becoming a conservative originally was the fact that the GOP and that conservatives embrace those like the morality of Christianity and those traditional values, not just like. And people talk about traditional values. It's not like you're like the whole hysteria about Trump and gay people and stuff like that. It's not like you're gonna say that you hate gay people, because that's just obviously false. It's the idea that it's like, when you get married, you don't cheat on your wife, or treat other people just like a common respect,
building off
stuff
that,
like that.
I think it's important to remember that these don't have to just be Christian values. I mean, for most of us, they are rooted in Christian values, but these are important in any culture. And these are things that we see failing in failed experiments and failed cultures, etc. So I think it's important that we market these as broad, important values for any society, rather than just talking about Christian values.
Right.
These are important human values for any society, grounded in our faith, but important for everyone. And even many atheists have acknowledged, scholars have acknowledged that while they some have a certain contempt for the Christian faith, they don't have contempt for how it displays itself in society. The results are generally very good. It builds a better, more caring society, and that's a good thing.
And I think just in terms of you mentioned atheists and their recognition of these values, I think what people don't understand is that even if you don't believe in God, and I always try to say this to my friends who I know I'm not going to convince to be any little bit religious, because I feel like they're like, if I touch a Bible, I'll set on fire. Like that's their attitude towards the whole thing. I'll be like, but even I was like, just in principle, like in principle, if you believe this, just like that's what you can stand by. Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm like this super religious person that goes to church every Sunday. That's not true. I haven't been to church in a long time. But for me, in principle, it's very important that you stick to it, because that's the way because that's just, I mean, it just makes sense. And then it's obviously based on religion, and I believe that, but I don't really think you have to be religious to think this. And I think that there's this idea, and when you put you said it doesn't have to be Christian or something like that. That's the exact right thing to tell them. You don't have to be Christian to believe your rights come from God.
You don't have to be Christian to know that a child will have a much better shot at success if they grow up in a two-parent home.
Like God didn't just make these laws just for no reason, just to have arbitrary laws.
Right.
They actually have a benefit to society and to the individual.
Yes.
And then even on the single parenthood thing, I mean, you have to be so careful with language now, because as soon as you misspeak one word, they'll call you like a bigot without even we've said this multiple times now, without even hearing the whole argument. Like again, when a person speaks about single motherhood, it's not, you're not saying single motherhood is necessarily quote like a bad thing. Not to say that single mothers are bad mothers, not to say that single fathers are bad fathers, that these are bad people. That's not the object of what you're saying, because that's just like they frame it that way, but that's not what you're trying to get across. What you're trying to get across is that in terms of economic structure, like the family economic structure, the most solid, the most stable economic structure is the two-parent household.
And I talked about this in an article I wrote for a different publication a few months ago. It's talks about how the two-parent family is the real white privilege when you look at the statistics. And that's based on experience from what I saw back home too. But yeah, people kept telling me, well, good job writing that, because you have to be so careful when you're talking about the intersection of race, family, and entitlement programs. You're dealing with all the faux pas. So you do, especially as a conservative, you have to be very, very careful. And this is how it is. But like you said, I stressed in my column, some of the most courageous women I've ever met have been single mothers. They have to be. A successful single mother is an incredibly strong, courageous woman. But the fact is that they are not as common as we would need, anywhere near as common as we would need them to be for single parent families to be broadly successful. The fact is they aren't.
And again, like when you say that, you're not trying to offend people. People get so offended, like people act so offended by it, and it's just this complete, it's like you're having a conversation not to them and not at them, but next to them, where like you're talking this way and they kind of hear like the sound waves kind of spread out, and then they're like, what'd you say about single mothers? Like,
exactly.
Like, do I have to jump down your throat right now?
But this is what the left has done with these issues. They've made us all so sensitive to anything that could possibly be perceived as an insult to any kind of community, that it's impossible to discuss the problems. So we always see, let's have the left always talks about, let's have a discussion about race. And we say, yes, please, let's have one. But it never happens. A few years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, Paul Ryan started taking a big interest in poverty. It's since become one of his big things. But one thing he talked about in the committee was problems in the black community. And he said that there was a cultural problem in the black community. And many leftists in Congress were furious about this from urban districts. They were livid about it, and they started trashing him in op-eds and in public, and Paul Ryan was kind of taken aback. Because the truth is, yes, there is a cultural problem in the black community. There's a very serious one in the communities, in the families. You just talk to the children growing up. They live terrible lives in many cases in poor urban communities. So yes, there is a cultural problem, but the left hides from that. Right. And the question is, why? Are they trying to hide the failure of their own policies, or what it is, I don't know.
And that's the thing that, Ben Shapiro talks about a lot, is exactly what you just said. It is that cultural aspect that Paul Ryan spoke about. People attacked him for it, but Ben Shapiro talks about that all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a lot of, and this is why, part of the reason why I liked something that Trump did was that when Trump went to Detroit and he spoke about the African American communities and the urban communities that are struggling.
Yeah.
That was really, at least to me, like the first time a Republican, even if I don't agree with all of his policies to fix the problem, actually went in and said it. Like he
really, since maybe Jack Kemp in the 90s. Yeah.
He had the stones to go there and say it. That takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
Because these places are like owned by the Democratic Party with this narrative that it's our way or the highway.
And what's frustrating is here is where our cultural argument is so important, but here's where they hear it the least, and that's one of the huge tragedies. And I've written about this before. It's so
your own writing, Arno.
Yeah. Wow. And all of this was for different publications too. So sorry.
Whoa.
But what was I saying? Yeah, and this is what these are the communities that need these kind of arguments the most, but they're not getting it. They get all their stuff from the left, but the truth is, culture. If you look at the 80s, the economy grew exponentially, but the black community didn't see much improvement at all, because the cultural problems weren't being fixed. You can cut taxes all you want. If you're a kid growing up in a broken school, broken community, broken home, you're not seeing those kind of benefits in your daily life the way that a middle-class white kid growing up is, who's going to go to college and enter into a strong job market. That doesn't help someone who jumps out of high school early and doesn't have any skills. They're going to be working a minimum wage part-time job regardless, and you can't change that. And so that's why culture is so important. And then it does switch away from economics to culture.
I think another thing with that, tying this back into the religious aspect, is that we need churches to go in there, really, and provide charitable work. I went to Creation Fest over the summer, which is a big Christian music festival. And one of the big themes there with the speakers was going into poor communities and teaching them about God and bringing them into a community like the church that can really help them and almost be, to almost give them like a father or something like that, or like a mother, to kind of fill the void that missing a parent would fill, and then building relationships with really good people and getting connections and things like that, and it can really help communities.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the left hates the church, and they don't want this to happen. They want the government to come in here and comfort these people, but when it should be the church.
In some communities, you do have these church groups, but they're number one, they're far weaker than they used to be. Mm-hmm. And number two, there's not much they can do anymore. You're talking about father figures and stuff. You do have like big brothers, big mm-hmm. sisters. That exists and that's very good, but it's not enough for everyone. and the churches do charitable works, but the question always comes back to, what do they do? Where do the problems start? Because it's so complicated and multifaceted that these, upstart churches, who don't have a hierarchy or anything, have trouble really addressing this in any kind of comprehensive way, outside of offering some kind of spiritual outlet. And it's often effective, and it's often not. It depends on the church. But the biggest thing, and you said this, Peter, is that people have become so dependent on the state that the church has become increasingly irrelevant. I think that's the key thing. Until churches feel empowered and get the resources they need to do this kind of work, that is your best shot of rebuilding these communities. Obviously, the government isn't capable of doing that.
Well,
Merry Christmas, everyone.
We've,
Merry Christmas.
We've gone for quite a long time. I would love to continue this actually another time, because I feel like there's a lot more to be said about this.
Yes. Yeah.
But for now, we'll have to say goodbye. We hope everybody has a Merry Christmas. Hope you get all the things that you want from Santa. And
or from on Hanukkah.
Or Hanukkah Harry.
Hanukkah Harry. Yeah.
Hanukkah Harry. And actually, a guy just walked by the door and he stared at Kirk laying on the floor for his 3DS.
Hi, Kirk.
There's a guy that just walked by and he was like,
Kirk.
He was like staring at you. Kirk don't care. Anyway, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with the New Year's episode.
Bye, everyone.
Until then, have a great life.
Bye.